Hi there, it's Thomas. Today I want to tell you a slightly frustrating story about Link's auto jump. This has been a staple of the 3D Zelda games from Ocarina of Time all the way up until Skyward Sword. When you run towards the edge of a ledge or a cliff and there's a gap in front of you, then instead of falling in like you might expect, Link takes a flying leap across the gap. This is Link's auto jump, and I think it's a pretty iconic part of what makes a 3D Zelda game a 3D Zelda game. And so this evening actually, I wanted to find out where Link's auto jump had come from, who came up with it. And so I did some Googling and I found my story, an interview with the man who came up with the auto jump itself. Bingo! Except it turned out it wasn't that simple at all. There's actually a weird little controversy behind this auto jump. But before we get into any of that messy stuff, I first want to read you that original script I wrote before I found out any of the stuff I found out later. At the center of Link's automatic jump is this guy here, Eiji Aonuma. Nowadays, I think a lot of us see him as the Zelda guy. He's been with the series for over a decade, and he's produced every one of these games from the last 15 years. Wow. But when Aonuma joined Nintendo, he'd actually never played a single video game before in his life. Shocking, right? And so his first few months at Nintendo were mainly spent playing games just to get the hang of this new, or new to him, art form. Around the time he joined Nintendo, a game called The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past was released, and it really captured Aonuma's attention. It opened his eyes to the medium of games. Just look at this huge world to explore. And 2 years later, this game got a sequel called Link's Awakening. When Aonuma picked it up, he was quite literally captivated. He spent hours traversing the island of Koholint. It felt like a small world, but very vast as well, he'd later explain. To Aonuma, Link's Awakening really was the embodiment of what Zelda should be. This was the quintessential Zelda game. A few years later, Aonuma would be given an opportunity. All this time, he'd been desperately wanting to work on the Zelda series. And when he mentioned this to the game's creator, Shigeru Miyamoto, Aonuma was welcomed in with open arms. "We don't have enough people for The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time, so come on in for a spell," he was told. That spell, by the way, ended up being the entire duration of the game's development. So Aonuma was put in charge primarily of the game's dungeons. It was his job to decide how these dungeons would look, what their layout would be, and which enemies would reside inside them. But Aonuma felt a little lost. He'd never made a Zelda game before, after all, so he struggled to figure out what the essence of a Zelda dungeon should be. Not only that, but this was the first time that Zelda had gone 3D. This was truly uncharted territory, and Aonuma was at the helm of the dungeon boat. What was he to do? When I started working on Ocarina of Time, this was the first time a lot of us were handling a 3D game. And so, it was a challenge. We didn't know what was right. We didn't know what the correct answer was. But I always had the vision of the dungeons and the gameplay from Link's Awakening. I never told anybody specifically, but I always had that in the back of my mind, and tried to convert the feeling I got from Link's Awakening into a 3D world. So, in other words, Aonuma directly used Link's Awakening to guide him and his team in designing not only the game's dungeons, but Ocarina of Time as a whole. And there was one very specific thing he took from Link's Awakening, a single item called the Roc's Feather. If you've never played Link's Awakening, Roc's Feather is something you pick up fairly early on, which allows you to jump. You can jump over gaps or even jump over enemies. And so Aonuma explained in an interview with Edge magazine that Ocarina of Time's jump was directly inspired by the Roc's Feather from Link's Awakening. But that still leaves a big question for us to answer. In Link's Awakening, you press a button to jump. In Ocarina of Time, Link does it by himself. What's going on there? Well, it all comes back to Aonuma. In an interview with The Guardian, Aonuma explained that he was no good at what he calls jump games, like Mario, for instance. Remember, he'd never played a single video game before he joined Nintendo, so he didn't have any practice playing platformers when he was a kid. He further stated, quote, "I always miss the point where I should land, and I always cry out and say, wait a minute, is this the end of the whole story? Is there no rescue from that?" So, by Ocarina of Time's development, Aonuma was sick and tired of jump games. He didn't want to have to jump anymore. If only the game would do it for him. Which gave him an idea. What if the game could do it for him? He told this to the team, and a few months later, Link's auto jump was up and running. And it was all because he wasn't any good at games. What a silly man. Okay, so that was going to be the end of the video. We found out where the auto jump came from, end of story. Except when I was about to get started making the thing you just saw, I found another interview that turned this story on its head. It was about the auto jump, just like the other ones, except this time it wasn't with Aonuma. It was with Shigeru Miyamoto, the guy that created Zelda, and Aonuma's boss at the time of Ocarina of Time's development. So I want to read you a part of that interview so you can see how important it really is. So Miyamoto and the interviewer, Iwata, are talking about how Ocarina of Time was one of the first games where standing on the top of a cliff and jumping off really made you feel dizzy, like it was a huge height in the real world. Miyamoto says, "That effect was born once we incorporated auto jump. I thought of auto jump on one of my days off. I couldn't wait to get to work on Monday. I gathered everyone on Monday morning and said, we're gonna do something called auto jump. Everyone's response was, say what? The team that had made Mario games was going to give up the jump button. I thought, if we use auto jump, then we can do all kinds of things." They contradict each other massively too. It's not just like a little disagreement on the details or about how the jump came to be. Both Shigeru Miyamoto and Eiji Aonuma claim to have invented the auto jump. One of these men has to be lying to us, which is scary. That's a scary idea. I don't like saying that. Both of these men are kind of heroes, I guess. Like, they've both done incredible things in the history of gaming, and yet one of them is not telling the truth. Who should we believe? I don't have an answer for you. We don't know. You don't know. No one can know who invented the auto jump, which is not the important thing here. Who cares about the auto jump? It's like a tiny part of Zelda. I think it's interesting. It's not a big deal though. But crucially, it puts into doubt the veracity of their statements in any other interviews, and more importantly, every statement. It reveals a huge fact about the nature of games journalism, which is we have to choose to believe these people. They could be lying to us. So say you're a random game designer at Nintendo or Sega or one of these big development companies, you come up with this groundbreaking game design concept. Your boss, be it Shigeru Miyamoto or Hideo Kojima or any of these big name people, could claim to have come up with it, and there's not much you can do. Which means we have to grapple with the fact that that could have happened. All of these times in newspapers and online publications and all over YouTube, we hear stories of the people who created the things we like. Some of those stories might not be true. And the truth is, we can't know. But I think there's one important takeaway from this, and it might not be obvious at first, but I think it's so important, which is that games aren't made by a person. It's so easy, and I'm really guilty of this, for turning it into a simple story with a protagonist and a beginning and an ending and hurdles along the way that this one person has to overcome. But really, that could not be further from the truth. Games like Mario and Zelda are developed by huge teams of people, usually over 100 with AAA games. Smaller games might be 50, 20, 30, but it's never just one person. And I think that's a fact that we have to grapple with as storytellers, that I have to grapple with. So if there's one thing that I think you should take away from this, it's that these people you love have done amazing things. Shigeru Miyamoto is an incredible game designer. Like, he made Super Mario, he made Donkey Kong. He's clearly a talented dude, but it's not him alone. All of these games that he worked on were created by huge teams of people, and I think they deserve a lot more credit than they sometimes get. thank you for watching this weird video. Hey, if you want to support these videos financially, you can do so on patreon.com/thomasgamedocs, and your support really does help. You can also buy merchandise if you want to, which is cool. I'm really proud of how it turned out, and I'll see you next week. Goodbye.